Hello everybody, welcome back to Making Records with Eric Valentine, that's me. So this episode, I'm going to do two things. I wanted to just kind of share the plan for the episode on this Friday because this is going to be a new thing for this YouTube channel. We are going to do a live stream moment. I haven't done that before, and I think it'll be interesting. See what happens, and I can do it with the safety of a professional live performer. That is my wife, Grace Potter, always entertaining, so she knows how to do live stuff. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do an episode about her new record, which comes out this Friday. It's called Mother Road, and so she and I will go live on this channel, on my YouTube channel, Making Records with Eric Valentine, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, and we're going to have a quick chat between the two of us about the experience of making the record. I think I have, we captured some video and stuff when we were working on it, so we'll share some highlights of just stuff that happened, while we were doing it. And then we'll open it up for questions. So if people have questions, we'll be able to see comments coming in, and people can ask questions for me or Grace, and we'll do our best to answer them live. And then after that, I'll switch over to a pre-record of me doing a production deconstruction of one of the songs from this new record. I'll do the way I've always done it. Just go through the whole thing, show all the tracks, how they were recorded, what was done to them to get them where they are, what was done in the mix, the whole mix setup, the whole thing. So you can just see top to bottom how the thing was done. So that is going to be this Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. So hopefully, if you're interested, you'll be available to check that out. Tune in, it'll be super fun. We'll be able to actually do this thing live. And so then the rest of this episode is me trying to get caught up on the comments and questions that have come in over the last, now I guess what is it, 5 episodes. So a bunch of really great questions and comments, from episode 21 all the way up until episode 25. And so I've been keeping track of where I left off, what the last thing was that got answered. So I got a pretty good pile of stuff here. We'll see how far I get. Let's see, Sagan just went to bed, and Mama just got back in town. We'll see how much time I got here. I'm gonna do my best. So let's dive in, get to it. Here we go. This is the next comment. It was from episode 21, and so it looks like it's from user me. And this is mostly a comment, and I think it's based on a comment that somebody made earlier. It says, sheetrock sounding bad, I think, is one of them internet myths that people latch onto and believe to be 100% fact and parrot it endlessly into the far corners of the interreg. And this person is saying, it sounds fine in their room. You use the sound as a feature. I've heard recordings on a train that sound amazing. So a bit of sheetrock really isn't an issue unless, again, there's some foul language in there. But so I wanted to keep this in here because I've actually had a chance to hear the room here, which does have a lot of sheetrock. Pretty much all of the walls, all of the walls have sheetrock. All the ceiling is wood, and then the floor is cork. So I guess it's about half and half sheetrock and wood. And I'm here to say, so far, it sounds incredible in there. Like the first recordings I've done, the room sound is just like, you turn it up and it's so beautiful sounding. So, I think it's mostly due to the size in the room, but the sheetrock, it doesn't seem to be hurting it at all. Early on I had a plan of putting a bunch of wood paneling on the walls, and maybe I'll still do that at some point. But for right now, man, it sounds incredible in there. So at least, in my experience, just, the room the way it is now, I certainly wouldn't kick it out of a recording in the morning for sure. You know, it sounds great in there. So just thought I'd throw that out there. So far, so good. Okay, so then next one is from YouTube username Dan Rhodes. Have you thought about putting in a pulley system so you could hoist mics up high to get the ambience near the ceiling? Great question, and yes, I have. You know, it's on my list, particularly in those ISO booths because they're relatively small, but it's super high. You know, the ceiling goes up probably at least 25 feet, and so if you wanted to get like a good pre-delay on the room sound, the only direction you can go is up, and so we're definitely going to do that. It's a great thought. And I share the sentiment there. So yeah, so at some point, you know, there's only about 100 million things to do on the list of stuff, but I'll get to it at some point, and I'm looking forward to that. Okay, next one is Henning Opperman, username Henning Opperman. Okay, thank you, great. Would you ever consider doing an episode or two about your work with the Wombats? I recently noticed by complete accident that you happen to be involved in one of my favorite indie pop bands, tracks that you reference. And okay, yeah, you actually specifically mentions the Greek tragedy, the song Greek tragedy. I don't think I worked on that one. But regardless, I'm guessing there may be some of the ones that I worked on are the ones that you're enjoying, and I would love to do an episode about a Wombats track. I would especially love to get them in and get them involved in it because they're incredible. They're just super fun, amazingly funny, just really, really cool folks. I really enjoyed working with them a lot and incredibly talented. So, so I'm sure, you know, at some point there'll be a time where the stars align for that, and it'll happen. I would love to do that. Okay, so then we got Eric Hair Recording is the username here. It says, thanks for stuff. Could you elaborate on the Cat 5, Cat 6, and grounding issues you mentioned in a previous episode? Okay, I've mentioned this a couple times. Happy to mention it again or go over it again. And so the grounding issue with Cat 6, so when you're doing these Cat 6 runs for mic tie lines, what ends up happening is 4 mic tie lines get bundled together into one Cat 5 or Cat 6 cable, and those 4 microphones will share a ground. And so if those 4 microphones are all going into a microphone preamp that has 4 channels, then those 4 channels would be grounded together anyways, and it wouldn't be an issue. If you're having those microphones go into 4 different mic preamps, maybe a super vintage one and a new one or whatever, sometimes those grounds can interact in a way that will cause a ground loop. So that is the issue. That's the thing to watch out for with that. I think other than the grounding issue, the Cat 6, you know, mic line thing seems to be working great. I have it all over this new studio, and I've actually been using it. They're quiet. I'm not having any problem with the shielding, so it seems to be shielding the signals fine. I'm not getting any extra hum, or, you know, it's not inducing any noise in the line, and it's, you know, low capacitance. I think, you know, probably on average lower than a lot of mic cable you get out there, so it performs really well in that way. So I think it's working great, and I haven't had any ground loop issues with my mic preamps in here, but you know, that's what the issue can be with those things. Okay, then we got user Peter Bracrella. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Okay, dumb question. No such thing as a dumb question. Do the windows have any effect on sound or acoustic quality, or are just for cosmetic purposes? So that's actually a really good question. You know, the windows are there mostly for aesthetics, to let natural light into the room. I just think it's important just for the psychological health of everybody that's in the room to have some sunlight. I spent so much of my life inside windowless caves, and I'm not going to do it anymore. And I do feel like it is a bit of a compromise, because windows, what you get with windows is they reflect the higher frequencies very efficiently, so you get a very strong, very bright reflection off the windows. And then a lot of times, unless you're using very, very thick glass, the low frequencies can pass through them relatively easily. So, so it can make the ambience in the room sound a bit thin. There was a studio that I worked at in Marin called The Site, and they had a beautiful sound room with this beautiful, massive, window. That room did sound a bit thin. If you hit a drum, it sounds like psss instead of pow, And so in my room, everywhere there's a window, there is now installed a curtain that I can pull in front of it, in case that thing is just making it too splashy in there. So I try to make it so I can remove them from the equation where they might be causing problems. But definitely a really good question. And the room now, as I was just talking about, I love the sound of this room so far. And I've been using it with all of the curtains pulled most of the time. Because what the curtains do is they absorb more of the high frequencies, and you get that thing where the decay time of the lower frequencies is longer than the decay time of the higher frequencies, and you get that sort of like bending down quality in the room ambience where it goes, and it's super satisfying sounding. It's really just has this beautiful sort of explosive, just big warm sound to it instead of being like, So yeah, so that's how I deal with it. I just put curtains from. Okay, then we got Matthew Blackmore. Okay, what are your thoughts on polarity of signals going to the musician's headphones? Oh, this is a good question. In my experience, I've found things like vocal mics and even drum mics can sound vastly different, and in some cases much better in the performer's headphones if you flip the polarity. Yeah, this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, and it is a big deal. It's a very big deal, and it's become, I would say, maybe a bigger deal with the latency that's sort of unavoidable now. Recording into a computer, computers are just latent, even if you set the lowest whatever hardware buffer or whatever, and I have a headphone system that has a tiny bit of latency to it. And so, so that can definitely change the character of the whatever phasing issues that you're having. And so the issue is that you're hearing, like if you're singing, you're hearing the sound of your voice coming from your vocal cords and it's sort of resonating throughout your head, and then you're hearing it being, injected into your ears from the headphones. And so those two signals, are blending together, and now at a sort of like a random timing depending on the latency in the system, and so it can cause cancellations. And if I'm working with a singer and they're like, my voice just doesn't sound great, I instantly flip the phase. And I'll ask them, okay, which one sounds fuller, this way or this way? And there's usually one where the phasing, just their voice sounds nice and full. When it's reversed, man, like you just can't get your voice loud enough because all the fundamental tones are just getting canceled out. It's a real bummer. Sometime I'll just do it preemptively, like right out of the gate. As soon as they're hearing their voice in their headphones, I'm just like, I just want to check the phase, boom, boom, boom. It's a really good thing to do because it can make it, sometimes, a musician or artist is too shy to say when the headphones don't feel right. And it's good to do it. It's also, something in the live context can also make a huge difference. When people are using in-ears, that we've been doing that, with Grace and her band live, checking the phase, man. It definitely makes a big difference. Good question. Good opportunity to bring that up and address it. Okay, next one is username M, just M, the letter M. Okay, yeah. Early mornings with the kids. Does that mean Daddy's retired from epic late night recording sessions with crazy rock fans? I've talked about this a little bit, but yeah, definitely at this point in my life, the way I used to produce records, where it was like 15 hours a day, at least 6 days a week, that is not going to happen. There's no way it could happen, and I have to confess, like, I actually don't really want that. I don't want my life to be balanced that way anymore, where there kind of was no balance. It was just all making record, you know, in the studio all the time, forever. So yeah, to answer your question, I won't be doing epic late night recording sessions with crazy rock bands. No, that's probably not going to happen. I mean, you know, there's sometimes it's unavoidable, and if everything gets sort of prepared properly, I had some genuinely late nights with Nickel Creek on their last record, just trying to, like, you know, their scheduling was very complicated. They all have very busy lives. They all have families now. I have a family. It's like, makes everything more complicated when you're trying to do stuff like this. And so, you know, we would have a window. It's like, we have this many days to get this done. And, you know, in the last 2 or 3 days, you start realizing, like, oh my God, we've got a fucking ton of shit to do. And, you know, start pushing it later. And so sometimes I would do the bedtime routine with Sagan, get him to sleep, and then go back and start recording again. So yeah, sometimes it still happens. But okay, so next one is Jeremy Dubois. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Okay, so this is a comment about I had to replace these big, you know, fixed window panes they're really like fixed doors, glass doors. And because of the structural reinforcement that needed to be done, the original ones wouldn't fit. And so I had to remove them, replace them. I couldn't return them, so I have them still. And 2 of them got used for to add some visibility between the ISO booths, which was kind of a brilliant, you know, kind of lemonade out of lemons there. But this user is suggesting making stand-up gobos, and that's a great idea. I think somebody else had suggested it along the way, but I think I'm definitely going to do that, because all the gobos that I have are opaque. You know, you can't see through them, and I think it would be cool to have a couple where I can put it up if we really need to have that eye contact. So it is a little bit of a trade-off, because like I was just talking about with the glass, you know, the gobos that I prefer are the ones that have an absorptive surface, so they're not interacting so much with whatever microphones you have right on the musician side of the gobo. And, you know, with a glass one, you're going to get a lot of reflections off there. It's going to be, you know, it'll cause a little acoustic drama there, but you know, it might be worth it if somebody really needs to see somebody else. Okay, so then Camshash, I think is the username, asked, okay, Eric, I recall you saying that you're semi-retired, but what are your plans with the studio once you're fully retired, whatever that may look like? You know, I'm not sure yet. I mean, right now, I'm just, you know, enjoying working on Grace's stuff, and it's available for that. I have a plan to make an album of my own music. I'm going to do that. I have plans to use this facility to do these making records retreats, where people will come here, and it'll be like a 5-day, you know, intense sort of deep dive thing. I just go over all of this stuff in person, you know, for people that want to come and do that in person. So that's the only plans that I have right now, and so I'll do that until the plan changes, and then I don't know, we'll see what happens. It is possible that other people can come record here, but it's really not going to be set up or advertised as a commercial space for whoever can just kind of come here and pay to use the place. It would definitely have to be people that we know, that, you know, are friends with, and we feel comfortable having, basically, you know, in our house. So, we have lots of friends that like recording stuff, so I'm sure that'll probably happen at some point. So yeah, so there you go. I'm not totally sure what will happen if there's ever a moment where I don't ever want to use a studio. It's sort of inconceivable still, even at 54, but I'm sure that time will come at some point. Okay, so okay, so this is username, the only guy in the village. Hey, Eric, loving this series of vids. At Barefoot, you had mic pre's in the live room with the artist to reduce mic line lengths. What was this? Was that setup born out of necessity, and is it a personal preference you intend to keep using the new studio? Thanks for the great insight. Okay. Yeah, so I changed my thing with this for a long time. I was really into, you know, having the mic pre's out in the sound room. And, you know, it was one of those things that came up early on when I was really like, you know, it was younger. I was just sort of earlier in this whole process of trying to learn about what matters and what doesn't. And there were some people that felt like that was important and that the high end would be better and you know, things about it will be better if there's these very short mic cable lengths and longer line level lengths. And so I really accepted that as a thing. And, you know, I definitely set up to do recordings that way. And so there are records, you know, I mean, all of those early records, first Third Eye Blind record, early Smash Mouth records, all the T-Ride stuff, like, and into the 2000s, you know, so like all of that stuff was done that way. And so I was really, you know, attached to that for a long time. And I just kept doing it because it always seemed like it was working. And I never was able to like fully quantify it. Like, is this really a difference that I can hear that makes a difference that's really gonna like make or break this recording? And later on, I had some experiences with some other equipment, and my ethos kind of changed a little bit as I've gotten deeper into this. So, you know, earlier on, you have this. You know, this very simple sort of concept about what a good recording is, which is to get everything as clean and clear and, you know, get rid of any sort of interference or non-linearities or any of that stuff. You know, if you get that out of there, then your recording will just sound better. And there was a certain point where I just, you know, had the revelation that just making everything clean all the time is not it does not necessarily sound better. And so, you know, I just got on a different journey. And one of the things that really tipped me off to this was that there's one preamp that I love the sound of. It's a very popular Altec. It was one of these Altec 1567 mic mixers. It's got like 4 mic preamps and then it sums together with a single output. Beautiful sounding preamp, beautiful color. You know, like when you drive it for vocals or drums or whatever, it's just an incredible sound. And so I was trying to do the same thing of like, I'm going to put this in the sound room, and it'll be even cooler. You know, it'll be great in there. And so I put it in there, and it sounded kind of weird. Like, man, this is not what I remember this sounding like. And so I started to do some tests with that, and it turned out with that particular mic preamp that having a long line level run coming off of the mic preamp was detrimental. That introducing capacitance on the output of that thing caused the output transformer to ring and created this big peak, this crazy peak in, you know, the high frequencies. It was up like around 18, 19K, but definitely, you know, as it was tapering off, was well into a very audible range. And it, you know, it was quite noticeable. And there is a point with enough capacitance where it can sort of destabilize the circuit and actually start to, you know, feed back and stuff. This RCA console will do that. And so that was my first tip off that like, this isn't always the right way to do this. And so then with this studio here, and the other reality is like, you know, almost all of the recordings that I love that sound amazing to me definitely were not done with the mic preamps in the fucking sound room. You know, like all of these recordings from the 60s and 70s, like I don't think anybody was doing that. You know, if somebody was, it was a total anomaly. You know, like that's just not how people did it back then. So And I just realized at a certain point that, like, obviously this is not that important. You know, like the sounds that I'm still chasing today definitely were not doing that. So this is not the like make or break thing. And so, and it is a kind of a hassle, you know, it's kind of inconvenient. And so this new place, I abandoned that. All the preamps are in the room here with me. They sound great. I love being able to just reach over and turn the fucking gain on them. And so I'm over it. I moved on, and I'm much happier for it. So thank you for asking. Okay. So Tim Buell, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, is asking, can you talk a little bit about the financial side of this build? Not specific numbers, but maybe a bit more philosophically on how you've balanced throughout your career spending money on gear that is long-term investment. It's sometimes hard for me to see the direct return on investment on big gear construction investments, and wondering how you view the risk reward of those kinds of purchases. Yeah, you know, it's a good question. You know, some of these things I think are totally unjustifiable if you're really just looking at it as a financial investment. You know, buying something like an original Fairchild, you know, which are now going upwards of $100,000. That's not worth it. I don't know. Well, I guess there is the argument that it is going to continue to go up, and so it's probably, maybe it is a good financial investment. They certainly haven't gone down in their lifespan, but yeah, there's a bad example. Sorry. But there are certainly things out there, you know, you can spend a lot of money on that, you know, maybe will not make the difference and justify the cost. And I would say that this studio build is a really, really good example of that. And I'm not really thinking about this this studio build as a financial investment. It's, you know, and it's been very expensive, more than I originally anticipated. You know, large construction projects are often like that. I was also, you know, got derailed a bit by the pandemic. Everything got super expensive. You know, all the building materials went up, all the delivery times went up. I had the complication of selling another studio in the pandemic. That, you know, delayed things even more. Delays definitely equal, you know, more cost. So the cost of the thing definitely has gone beyond what it was originally supposed to be. If you know, if I was able to like bang this out in a really efficient way. But this is not an investment for me to try and make back. This place for me is an investment in my life experience. And so, you know, and I'm extremely fortunate in my life. You know, I worked really, really, really hard, like I just described, literally from the time I was like, you know, 16, 17, somewhere around there is when I first joined T-Ride, and we started recording our own demos, and we built a studio. Like literally from the time I was a teenager until somewhere around 2015, 2016, I worked, no joke, like 14, 15 hours every day in the studio, 6 or 7 days a week for that entire time. You know, there's occasionally a family vacation here and there, whatever, you know, go and see my family at Christmas, whatever. But everybody just sort of accepted the reality, like, Eric's just like a workaholic. He's going to be in the studio. The ironic thing is, like, I don't consider myself a workaholic because I fucking loved it the whole time. It was super fun. So, so the benefit of that, I really put in, you know, kind of double time for that whole era of my life. And, you know, it has given me the financial freedom now later in my life to be able to do something like this, where I want to have a particular life experience for the second half of my life. You know, I'm 54 now. And I was lucky enough to be able to afford to do it, you know, and make this beautiful place that's going to be just sort of like a giant sandbox for me to, audio sandbox for me to play in and share with people, and it just does nothing but bring me joy. And so that's really what this is. It's an investment in my own life experience. And there's some other things about it. I'm trying to create a situation where I can still be creative and be a dad and have that all happen, you know, together, and be available for him when I need to be, and have creative experiences available to me, so I still have that outlet and stay sane and all that stuff. So there, you know, it's part of a larger picture of sort of my, you know, overall mental health, and just being able to really enjoy my life. You know, it's the only one I got, and so you know, I've never been motivated by money, other than the fact that it just affords freedom. To do things that will bring joy in life, you know, at times. But the money itself, I don't really care about. You know, I don't care about having it or not having it or whatever, you know, I just don't care. You know, this place is I'm trying to set it up in a way where I won't really have any overhead, and so I don't have to think about money. I don't, you know, I don't want to have to worry about it. And so, you know, this property is paid off. I don't owe anything on it. We make our own electricity, we have our own water, you know, the utility bills are really low, almost, you know, close to nothing. And so very little overhead. And so, you know, it just allows freedom, to just be able to enjoy the time, you know, that you have on this planet. And that's all I'm trying to do. Just trying to have a good time here while I'm here. So I don't know. I hope that answered the question, but that's kind of where I'm at with it. Okay, so now user Nick Guitar is asking, is there a particular sound acoustic isolation reason for Cork flooring choice, or you just like the look or feeling of it? Yeah, so I actually didn't choose the Cork flooring. Grace chose it, and so there really wasn't any specific acoustic, you know, consideration in the choice. The things that I liked about when she mentioned it, I do think it looks beautiful, and the product that we got is really easy to install. It just sort of like, you know, snaps together. You just tap it together. You don't have to use any glue, so there's not all this like horrible glue or putting down tile that requires, you know, whatever, some sort of grout or something. So really easy to install, and then it comes with its own little cushion pad on the bottom built into it. And so in this particular place, that made sense because you know, it's all concrete slab, the floors in here, and I needed a little extra layer of insulation so these floors don't feel cold on your feet in the winter. I still tend to not wear shoes, and so it just seemed to be really, you know, great choice for that. So yes, I think to answer your question, it was more about the look and the feel than the acoustics. Seems to be sounding good, so that's kind of a bonus. But you know, most any version of, you know, organic wood product on the floor is probably going to sound pretty great. You know, most of my other rooms have had either hardwood floor or some version of that. So so there you go. It's been working out great. Okay, so Ingenious Keys is asking, do you record impulse responses of the unfinished room? Or maybe they're asking, did you record impulse responses of the unfinished room? Could give you nice custom reverbs. I haven't done that. I haven't just taken the time to kind of find whatever the tools are to capture impulse responses. I'd love to do that. Yeah. Because it was a different sound. The sound, you know, the room really sounded beautiful when it was all just wood in there. And I did, you know, I did some final overdubs and vocals with Nickel Creek for the new Nickel Creek album before that room got insulated and sheetrocked, and it was a cool sound. But yeah, I think it's probably time I learn how to do that. I don't know why I haven't learned how to do that, but I would love to be able to do that. It'd be very useful. And now, you know, I have that room. I have a new chamber that I'm really excited about. It sounds beautiful. So, yeah, it'd be nice to get some impulse responses and that stuff. Okay, so then I have Ryan Crickshank is asking, I'd love to know what ideas have you taken from fitting out Barefoot, and what have you been excited to change for the new studio in comparison to Barefoot? Okay, yeah, there were some specific changes there. Well, the The sound room, you know, is just sort of inherently different because it just has different dimensions. But other than that, it is pretty similar. It's, you know, it's got a cork or wood floor. The walls at Barefoot had this kind of bizarre coating on it. It looked like some sort of acoustic coating on the walls, but it was just, you know, sheetrock or plastered walls. And then there was curtains everywhere in there in Barefoot. I have to say, Barefoot sound room, I think I've mentioned this recently, was not my favorite sound room in the world. That fucking sound room definitely was a challenge. It did not have a great low-end presence in that room. Things tended to sound a little bit thin in that room. And so I always had to make extra efforts to sort of combat that. So I didn't love the sound of that room. But I didn't do anything wildly different in this room. I think just the dimensions are better and it sounds great. The big differences are definitely in the control room. So obviously, number one big difference, no console. I'm over it. Not going back. I've been actually using this setup and I fucking love it. It's so good. I get everything that I really needed about having a console, that I loved about the console experience, I can get with this setup without having this big stupid thing in front of me. And there's things about this that are just way more streamlined. It just feels so much smarter. And so I'm really, really digging that. We'll be able to get into it. You know, I've talked about it before. I went through the patch bay layout and this concept of sort of creating a console with the normalization in patch bay, and we'll have an opportunity to really go deep into that, and I'll be able to demonstrate how this whole setup is working, because man, do I love it. It's so good. So that was really the biggest thing. No console. I have all my outboard gear off to the sides. Yeah, there's some stuff up front, and so the room is just more open, and so the room is a lot more malleable, and there's really like no obstruction between me and the speakers, and so I get to hear things very clearly in here, and it's just been great. I'm super, super pleased with it. Okay, so that was the last one from episode 21, and so these are now questions, comments from episode 22. So I don't know if any of you can actually recall what episode you may have put one in, but so here you go. Okay, so question. Eric, you hinted at designing your own tape saturation plugin at one point or one in your early videos. I think any development on that or other Valentine plugins? Okay, there is a development. That process has started. So there is going to be plugins. I'm working on it. I found a team that I'm super excited to work on this with, and we're having a good time. I mean, this is quite recent, and so yeah, I'm going for it. So I don't want to say too much early on as to what the first things are going to be and who it is and all that stuff. They'll, you know, when they're ready to come out, we'll be able to go over all of that stuff. But yeah, I'm really excited to get into this, and so there'll be a variety of stuff. I've got a bunch of things that I really want to try and do. So, you know, I know for sure there's going to be, I don't know, 4 plugins, you know, or right out of the gate that I'm really excited to try and get going. So the answer is yes, that's happening. Okay, so Bob Barney asks, okay, feel silly typing this, but I have to ask, do you have a guideline for setting mic pre-input gain? Yeah, it's so funny that, like, when people say, I think this is a dumb question or this is silly to ask, they're always really, really good, important questions to ask. So setting mic pre-input gain is a really, really important issue when you're recording stuff. So I would say out of the gate, you know, the biggest, you know, thing to watch out for is setting the gain too high. Because once something clips or distorts too much, it's really, I mean, it's really impossible to get it back to, you know, a really like purely undistorted sound. And so I would say I'm a little bit more conservative in the way I set mic preamp levels, I try to make sure that there'll never be a chance that this mic preamp is going to do something that will render a performance useless, because that is a disaster. If a singer or somebody does something that is truly extraordinary and it was a big expressive moment and it gets super distorted and you can't fucking use it, you have truly failed at your job as an engineer. That is a disaster. And the cool thing is, especially now, you can always add more distortion. Like, it's easy to add more. So that being said, you know, I try to get as close as I can into that sort of sweet spot. You know, especially now that I'm using a lot of this RCA tube console. The color and saturation on those preamps is unbelievable. I was actually just earlier today mixing something, and I ran the vocal back through the mic preamp again. It was recorded through the preamp, and I had to set it somewhat conservatively so there wouldn't be a moment that would destroy a performance, because this was live with a whole band. You know, like, I can't lose the performance. So I set it a little bit conservatively, and then I got it into my world. I was able to set the compressor the way I wanted, so the dynamics are a little more controlled. Went through a tape machine, which added some beautiful color to it, and then in the final mix, I can run it through that preamp again, and it's easier to hit that sweet spot because I'm not dealing with like 5 dB chunks of gain. I can finesse it with, you know, a fader. I can even ride the amount of gain that's going to the preamp and then ride the gain after it, so I can sort of control how much it's saturating in certain sections. So I think that's really, you know, been my approach with it. Is, you know, sure, I like to push preamps, but never in a way that would cause me to lose a performance. It's happened to me before. It's a bummer. You know, singers can get really, really fucking pissed off, you know, if they have a great moment that's just blown out and you can't use it. That's a disaster. Yeah, so yeah, the rest of this is just talking about if you know, record more conservatively, you can get more detail, but it's not as exciting sounding. And so, you know, like I said, I think you can have everything if you are a little bit conservative, because you can always add more distortion. That's super easy now. Okay, we got Angelo Boltini asking, if you're looking for tape this is all stuff about these tape plugins, okay, and he's saying, I've been using multiple iterations of acoustic taupe to emulate your workflow a bit. That sounds interesting. I've tried those plugins, and I couldn't get them to work for me. Yeah, I don't know. And the whole Acoustica world, I mean, they seem very brilliant, you know, at doing these emulations, but I find the interfaces, the names of the plugins, the installation process, everything about that whole world is so obtuse and so, I don't know, just complicated. It's very difficult for me to enjoy the whatever brilliant plugins they've made, because they're so difficult to just get to that point. So I can never remember what the plugins, all the plugins have all these kind of bizarre sort of abstract names. I never really remember what is what and where's where, you know, I don't know. I'm sure it's probably me, but I have not been able to get great results from those. Sounds like it's working for you. You know, like I said, it seems like they're doing good stuff. I just haven't been able to figure it out yet. Okay, here's another one. Daniel Crook is asking, do you have any advice on separating your engineering and creative brains, especially on projects that go on a long time? There may have been a question on this in the past. I've talked about stuff like this before, but I've been working a lot lately on some projects that have been going for a long while. I'm really struggling to hear things as music whilst we're in the studio, and to make any creative decisions, I have to listen to it in bed when I get home. Changing environment is all I can do. And it'd be much more efficient if I could find a way of leaving engineer brain behind whilst in the moment. Yeah, that's a tricky thing, because I think it is two very different ways of thinking. or one of them I think is specifically not thinking and just feeling. And I think for me, just with practice, I've been able to shift, my state of mind from one to the other when I need to. But I have to be very proactive about it and really sort of state the intention for myself. So after I've been like digging and immersed in chasing whatever, some stupid snare drum sound or a thing or an EQ or some compression setting or whatever, and I've been buried in that for a long time, and my brain is sort of grinding away on considering options. Maybe this would be better, maybe I should try that, maybe there's more gain on this side, whatever, all of these sort of like technical considerations to try and get what I'm imagining to come out of the speakers. And then there's, a moment where I do need to just stop for a second, and it takes me a second. So, I literally just stop, and now, I have the benefit of Max, the dog, so I'll take him outside and just throw the ball for a little bit, and then really go, okay, I'm not working on this. I just want to feel this song. I just want to see what this song feels like. And just put the song on and just close your eyes and listen. Eyes open, eyes closed listening is a pretty different experience as well. I do recommend that. There's times where it's really been useful for me. So I think, it's an important thing to state to yourself. This is another thing that I have to do when I'm shifting gears, because it's such a different mindset going from, because I will be working here in the studio here now right up until like 4:45, and then I grab my stuff and I run out the door and I go and pick up Sagan from his summer camp, and I have to really go, okay, I am not working now, I'm going to be a dad now, and I'm going to go and be with my son, and I'm not going to think about this anymore. I kind of have to say it out loud, or I'll go and pick him up and he'll be asking me questions and doing all the awesome, amazing stuff that 5-year-olds do, and my brain will still be thinking about something else and not paying attention and not being present for him. And so I think that's the best advice that I could give, is to state the intention, and and your brain hopefully will follow. The other thing that I've noticed is that sometimes I don't ever really hear a project, with true objectivity until way after it's done. I've had projects where when I was done with it, I was convinced it was the worst thing I've ever done. I can't listen anymore, like I don't think I'll ever want to hear this record again. And because, in the finishing stage, especially when you're mixing, I call it having your shit sensor just like on the highest sensitivity, because I'm specifically there to catch problems, and so I'm only listening for things that are wrong. And so it's very hard to hear it just for what it is, and I'm only listening for whatever the flaws are. And so, and there are times where I get to the end of the process and there's things that I have to just accept. I just either didn't get all the way there, or I ran out of time or something, and so all I can hear is the flaws, and I don't ever want to hear it again. But then a year or two later, I will have forgotten about that stuff, and I'll listen to it and go like, yeah, that wasn't that bad. Not a total disaster. So I've definitely, at times not ever really been able to succeed at, removing myself from the technical stuff and being able to listen more just as an objective listener. So it can be challenging for sure. Okay, so now we have Dan Olivier. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Okay, somehow on old drum recordings, even when each drum was obviously individually mic'd, the sense of space is so different from modern recordings. Each drum in the kit seems to occupy its own space in a very limited but perfectly punchy way. And by contrast, in modern recordings, I often feel like the individual drums are so huge that they mess up the stereo image by being too omnipresent. Can it be in part due to the amount of analog summing that would have taken place before they reached the record head? For example, with a modern DAW, would a snare top and bottom or kick in and out sum together in the analog world prior to hitting the computer have more of this sense of this limited physical space than two separate tracks bussed together in DAW mixing? Boy, that's an interesting question. You know, analog summing will have more coloration, so you might have more intermodulation distortion. That might be what you're hearing with this. I think the predominant thing for me, especially if you're talking about recordings from the 50s and the 60s, the unavoidable reality is that there is a huge amount of distortion on those recordings. Despite all of their best efforts, all they were trying to do was get rid of distortion, and still that stuff is just swimming in distortion. And the reality of that is really been sort of sinking in as I've been exploring this RCA console. It has a massive amount of distortion on the mic preamps, in the summing amps. Like, it's insane how much distortion this thing does. And it's insane how beautiful it sounds. I just can't believe that it sounds as good as it does. And it really doesn't sound like overly distorted to me. There's even times like using this setup where I'm like, this is still too clean. And it's an insane amount of distortion. And so my guess is that, that's probably most of what you're hearing. And, it's really, what the distortion does to my ears is that it makes things more two-dimensional to me. And so when you hear the drum impact, you hear the drum and you hear this ambience attached to it, but it doesn't sound far away. And I think that's kind of the punchiness that you might be referring to. It still has this immediacy to it because the distortion artifacts that are in there are very immediate sounding. And when you remove those and you're really hearing the purity of, a sound living in a space without any of the distortion, your ear is better at identifying that, oh, this thing is actually farther away from me. And so that's the immediacy that I really love in the old recordings. Man, they just, you can have all kinds of room sound on there and it's still just like, leaping out of the speakers at you. So that might be it. I'm not totally sure. And the analog summing could contribute to that, but probably in the sense that old analog summing would just be introducing yet another form of distortion in there, just intermodulation distortion. So, yeah, something to consider. My new approach is that you can never have too much distortion. So hopefully other people like it. Okay, so then we got Tortugala Productions. When you are doing noise reduction in RX, I guess this is the iZotope stuff, are you using it inside Pro Tools or do you prefer to work within the RX application? Do you have any reasons why you choose one or the other? Okay, yeah. So I do it different ways for different versions of their noise reduction. Let's see, I want to actually, do I have a session open here? I don't. So I can refer to this stuff correctly. Let me just do this really quick. I'll pull something up. My new Mac Studio is super fast, so this will be quick. Okay, noise reduction. Okay, so just so I'm making the right references to the stuff. Okay, so I am now on RX10. And so when I do the spectral denoise, I do it as a plugin. I like being able to automate it. That's why I specifically choose it as a plugin. Obviously, it does introduce a huge amount of latency, but most of the time I've got enough room to cover it. And so I do the thing, where it learns the noise if there's a place where you can hear just the noise. And then what I like to do is turn up the threshold in the sections where noise is an issue and turn it all the way down, where the instrument's playing loud and you can't hear the noise anyways, and it doesn't matter. Because I don't want this thing fucking with my sound if there isn't any noise, if the noise isn't an issue. And so I'll even do it, you know, at the end of a song where the tracks, everything is sort of trailing off and descending into this noise. As it's descending into noise, I'll be automating up the threshold to compensate. And so it just sort of disappears into nothing. But I don't want this thing on all the time, because there are some artifacts, even when somebody's just playing full on. They can change the sound a little bit. And I tested it. When the threshold is all the way down and is not processing anything, it will null with the original track. So there are no artifacts when the plugin is just instanced and it's not actually doing any noise removal. So, yeah, so that's my approach for that. And then there's the whole other thing where, okay, I gotta remember how to do this. Let me pull this up. So in the Audio Suite version, there is, okay, and they've had different ways of doing this. Okay, here's the connect thing. Okay, I don't know. They always change how this works, how to send a track to their application. I don't know. It's different. Again, I don't know how to do it. So when I'm doing, they have this spectral noise removal thing in their application where you can see on this spectral graph where the noises are, and that thing has been incredible for just removing one little like artifact of, you know, like a click track that gets into headphones or something. You can find it in there and just remove that and not, you know, affect anything else. And so that's when I'll use the application if I need to draw out specific parts of the frequency domain or something like that. I'm sorry, I forget the exact name of what that tool is in the application, but it's amazing. It works really, really well. Okay, but that's what it is. That's how I use it, and I love that plugin. It's amazing what it does. You know, it's made me a lot more fearless about using tape machines and things that are noisy because I can get stuff out of there. RX10, by the way, it has now a hum removal that has a learn function, and that fucking thing is incredible. Oh my God, for removing hum from guitars. It's like cheating. It's so cool. Okay, moving on here. We got Bob Barney. Okay, this is a question about third eye blind stuff. I've talked about this before. Happy to dive into it again. Is there a chance you might explain how you obtain the big guitar sound on God of Wine? Boy, do I love that song. I think I've said this before. I think that is my favorite track on that record. So that was a very specific approach, a thing that we tried. We were recording at Skywalker Ranch, another studio that has a huge room, and we had been experimenting throughout that record with blending amps, and I had this little custom box that was a splitter, a buffered splitter, so you could have the incoming guitar signal get split into 6 outputs. It was a pain in the ass because it wasn't the way you can do it like with reamps where you can isolate the grounding, and so the grounding was a total nightmare with that thing. I'd have to experiment for, you know, ever with ground lifts on the amps and stuff, which is super hazardous. Like, it was such a really fucking crazy thing to try and pull off. But we would get there. We'd get the ground loops, you know, minimized as much as possible, having a bunch of amps plugged in at the same time. And so God of Wine was sort of like the sort of most highly evolved version of that. We literally had 6 amps going on that song all at the same time. And I mic'd them all up. We had 1 million mics. We had room mics. It was like the most extravagant guitar setup ever. And so the idea with that sound was with a volume pedal, when he rolled the volume pedal back, he would get that clean sound, and he could just push the volume pedal forward and get the big, you know, more, you know, distorted sound. And so we adjusted all the gains of the amps. And so the amps were like, he had a modified Marshall that he was using. We were using these Jet, these Ampeg Jet amps. They were reissued in the 90s, and so I had a couple of those. I know we were using at least one of those. We were using, he also had this like Fender DeVille or some sort of Fender amp. That was part of it. What else was in there? There was more stuff. Maybe I had an AC30. Maybe the AC30 was in there. So I mean, we just kind of like had all of our favorite amps all plugged in together. The gain set. So when we rolled back the volume pedal to the right spot, it would be clean. You could push it forward, you know, play the big heavy parts. So that was the setup. And so we played the whole song as a performance with that setup. Maybe a couple punches here and there. We really went after some spots. There were some beautiful feedback moments. Those feedback moments were captured with him in the sound room. So we had a guitar cable going through the wall into the sound room so he could be in the control room with me. And Skywalker Ranch had a pair of those huge Allen Sides Ocean Way monitors in them. And so I could crank them up and he could get feedback in the control room. And so that was the thing we probably spent the most time on, was trying to get these really cool feedback moments. And I ultimately came up with a stereo blend of the close mics of the amps and then a stereo room on them. And so the guitar sound ended up being 4 tracks. So he played through the whole song, and then there's a spot that you'll hear in the second verse, or yeah, second half of the first verse, something like that. There's after this big floor tom hit, and then all of a sudden, even the clean sound sort of widens out. And what happens there is that we played a second pass of the guitar. And and that one I had to collapse down even further because we were running out of tracks. And so I think room mics and close mics got all blended together. And so I took the original guitar sound and took the stereo blend and leaned it, so pulled one fader down and pulled the other fader up off to the left, and then this overdub one got leaned the other way, so it was off to the right, and so all of a sudden you have doubled guitars that are panned out. And so then it pretty much stays like that. Even when it gets big and heavy, it is doubled guitars. So it's 2 passes, 6 amps, all playing together on each pass. A very extravagant setup in a ginormous cavernous room. The room sound has delay. You'll hear the room sound delaying off. And we were using these old like analog prime time delays where you have modulation, and I set the modulation pretty deep on that stuff. You can hear the echoes modulating, you know, and bending the pitch quite a bit. It's part of the sort of watery, kind of dreamy sound in there. So there you go. That's sort of an overview of how that was done on that one. Love that song. Love the sound of that one. JJ Weisler. Hi, JJ. JJ's a good friend I've known for a long time. Nice to see you here asking a question. We could certainly chat about this anytime. JJ played a band called High Water Rising a long time ago. I recorded with them, and then we've just been friends ever since. He's an amazing producer, studio owner in Northern California, and he's just a great dude. So he is asking, have you ever demoed or heard Dirac or Trinnov room correction systems? Okay, I think I've talked about this, and he acknowledges the latency issue right out of the gate here. So I was using that in my studio in Topanga. So yes, I have used them. I own one and used it in Topanga. The latency issues were really a problem for me. It was, you know, made it very challenging. And from what I understand, one of the technical people from the company reached out and said that they've, you know, got things in a really good place. And so I might go down that road again because it really did sound incredible. It sounded amazing in the Topanga setup. When you turn that thing on and off, it was like, whoa. It was a whole other experience, and I think in a really great way. And I got some really wonderful mixes out of that place. So it seemed like it wasn't lying to me. It just sounded great. So I have used it. My goal with this place was to try and get there without something like that. You know, I love these speakers. I trust these speakers. And the only thing I would say about it is that the sound, it sounds good, but it does sound a little bit processed to me. And at least with these Strauss monitors, They are just so effortless to listen to. They're just so natural and just so easy on the ears that introducing a massive amount of processing to the signal, I think you might be giving something up to do that, even though there might be something cool about the imaging or the accuracy or whatever. You might give up just how effortless these speakers sound. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll play with it down the road. But it's definitely it's a cool box. Okay, so more stuff about tape machine plugins. This is user UMP33. I have used the Slate digital virtual tape machine, and it's really good. It's definitely one of the best ones out there. And that fella over there at Slate that was doing all the Slate digital stuff, Fabrice Gabriel. I can never remember which one's the first name, which one's the last name. But he is really, really sharp and definitely knows what he's doing. And that particular emulation was one of the better versions that captures what happens when you really start to push level onto a tape machine, which is the hardest part to get. Things really kind of go in very unpredictable directions once you get into that realm of really saturating tape. And he did a good job of capturing it on that one. It's good. You know, I have the luxury of having real tape machines, and I love the way they sound. I have my 16-track Scully machine going. I've been recording everything through it. It sounds beautiful, and so that's what I'm doing. So yeah, I haven't had the need to chase, you know, emulators. This is more emulators, more people suggesting stuff. There's one called Satin by Uhi, I guess. Satin. I'll certainly check it out. But again, I don't have a huge motivation for doing it because I do have tape machines here that I love the sound of, and they're integrated into my setup in a way that's very, very effortless. So there's no difficulty in using them. It's sort of actually built into the workflow. I kind of have to go through the tape machine to get to the point where I'm mixing stuff. So I've been using my outboard gear and my tape machines more than I have in years in this new setup, and it's just so fun. It's really, really great to have it sort of built into the workflow. Okay, so then we have Journeyman Live asking, how thick is the Cork floor? Do you have a reference model? I'll start my studio floor soon. I'm sorry, this is probably way late for this. I apologize. This Cork flooring is just shy of a ½ inch for the cork, and then for the little insulating sort of padding layer on the bottom. And so, yeah, it works great. And you just kind of, you know, put in the flooring, then you can put in all of your baseboard trim and thresholds and stuff on top of that. It's all pretty straightforward, you know, how it goes in. Okay, this is Gain Marcio. How will you approach room treatment for the echo chamber? Will you take references from some classic Chambers IRs as a starting point, or just go chasing your own thing from scratch? And unrelated, do you keep crystals, Yamaha grand piano? Okay, yeah, I can answer both these. So, so this one, I did a little bit. I'm still sticking to the roughly sort of the Motown approach to the chamber, because that's what I had at Barefoot. The Motown approach is basically plaster walls, and then you put like this hard lacquer on top of them to make the walls a little more reflective. It'll extend the the reverb time for the highs, and in a chamber that can be nice to have it a little brighter. And so I did the same approach here, and I put like ceramic tile on the floor to make the floor just a little more dense and just to have a hard reflective surface. And with this I didn't even properly install the tile. We just laid it out on the floor. It just needs to be there to reflect the sound. So it's not like it's whatever, grouted and glued in place. So and so in this new one, instead of using an actual lacquer, we're starting to do more sort of film and video stuff here. And so I used a very high gloss paint that is the green screen color. So we might be able to use that room for green screen stuff. I know green screen is supposed to be matte, but I needed it to be glossy, so it was reflective, and so it was a compromise to make. And so we'll see. We haven't actually had a chance to try it for any green screen stuff, but I'm curious to see if that's going to work. And so it's just a way to maybe get another use out of the space. But so far, the chamber is really sounding beautiful. I've been using it. It's set up similar to Barefoot, where there's a door that you can open that basically opens the chamber to the big room. So when the band is playing in the room, the sound will pour into the chamber. So I get the actual direct sound of the band. It's not having to be fed through a speaker to go in there. And in this setup, it's been really cool because when I had the live band setup going, what you get in the chamber is pretty much just drums and lead vocal, which are two great things for a chamber, because I had the guitars in the ISO booths with their own room sounds, because those ISO booths have these huge high ceilings and still have not been treated with any absorption in there. So they have this really cool kind of like reverb chamber sound of their own. And so everything has a room sound, and it's all kind of isolated, and it turned out really cool. So that chamber sound, and I would say that it sounds a little bit more balanced just across the frequency spectrum than the Barefoot one. The Barefoot one had kind of a pileup in the mid-range that sometimes caused it to just not blend very easily. And this one just feels a lot more neutral. There's like a slanted ceiling in there, and so yeah, I've put some stuff in there to try and break up some of the parallel surfaces and cut down some ringing in, or flutters and resonances in there. And so far, it's sounding really beautiful. The one experiment that I might try in there is to put some mirrors in there, something really reflective, to see if I can extend the reverb time even more. It's just something I'm curious to try, so we'll see. I might try that at some point. And then I did not keep Crystal's Yamaha grand piano. And I think I already mentioned this at some point, but I'll say it again. That piano went back to the person that should have it, which is Stevie Wonder. he bought it. It's really funny. Well, I'm not going to tell the whole story again, but I think I talked about it. But yeah, I was very happy to have it go back to him. It made a lot of beautiful music at his hands, and hopefully he's doing that again. Okay, so next we have Steve Rendell, something, yeah. Okay, have you looked into the endless analog clasp system? Oh boy. Okay. So I did. I actually owned some of that. I did not have a good experience with that product, and not a great experience with that company. I don't know if they're still around. I'm guessing they aren't, because my experience was not good. I don't know how you could continue operating this way. But my issue with it was that it had some very significant shortcomings when being used with Pro Tools. And I didn't feel like they were particularly forthright about that when they were marketing it. And so when I got it and realized that there were all these problems with it dealing with latency in Pro Tools, it was like, this is not really usable. This is extremely clumsy, and this is not helping anything at all. And I should have known about this, that it works great with Radar and Logic, but I don't fucking use those, And so when I was like, hey, this isn't working for me, I'd like to return it. And I had the realization relatively soon after acquiring it. And the answer was, nope, can't return it. So I was like, great. So yeah, did not enjoy that. That was a bummer. And, you know, the way I've been doing the tape machine stuff, I think I've talked about this before, but it's so easy, you know, it's like, and especially now, because now I'm doing this thing where I capture the raw mic preamps into the computer, those feed into my analog chains with all my outboard gear and a tape machine, and then it gets printed having gone through the tape machine. And so, you know, it's a very seamless workflow. You know, I don't have any real, yeah, I don't imagine it getting any better than that. So, so yeah, I'm happy without it, without the Clasp thing. Okay, so then user NH, let's see, is saying, I've had Kissing Tree on my Good Music Mega playlist for years now, and I'm ashamed to say, didn't realize until you mentioned here that you had produced, recorded, and played on it. It is a fantastic track. +1 on a mixed breakdown for that song. Boy, I'd love to do that. That was such a fun project. I really, really enjoyed working with Spencer. He's such a gifted dude. Knowing that, okay, yeah, played drums, bass, and clav on that makes me really excited to hear your solo stuff. Okay, yeah. I don't know if my solo stuff would be, you know, sort of stylistically in that realm. But yeah, I'm sure I will find an opportunity to do a breakdown of that track. I would love to do it. There's some really, really cool things that happened on that track that I'm specifically very, very excited about. The strings on that are some of my favorite things I've ever captured. It's something I'd been chasing for a long time, and I finally got it on that thing. I tried it on other projects, and it was kind of like, eh. And that one, it really happened in the way that I was hoping. So it'd be fun to go through that one. Thank you for mentioning it. Okay, so then Lonerism. More tape plugins. The Hornet tape plugin sounds really good. I'll try and, you know, find a time to check that out. Again, not a huge motivation for me to do that. But yeah, we'll see. And I think, you know, I'm still, yeah, I am going to have to go through all these and see if any of them have incorporated the one characteristic of tape that I have never heard in any of the plugins. I'm still not going to mention it because I'm going to try and be a little protective of that, because I think, you know, if nobody else has done it, I think it could be the thing that's really going to finally get it right if I do a plugin. But I'll have to go and check some of them and see if anybody's done it. Okay, so then I've got Evgeny Vicky. What is the name of the German company, by the way? Moving to Germany soon. Okay, it's Renz Solutions, R-E-N-Z Solutions, I believe is the name of the company. I mentioned it a couple times, but there it is. You know, you can chase it down, I think, with that. And we are now in comments, questions from episode 23. Okay, still going strong here. I still got more in me. Still got a voice. Okay. Okay. Another panel check out is RPG Modex Broadband. I did look at those, and those look very interesting. I think they are doing something similar to this VPR thing, and the specs are very impressive. I'm sure, you know, it's just a very refined, probably, you know, well-tuned version of the VPR thing. They were just kind of expensive, you know, and I just enjoy the process of trying to figure it out. It's fun for me. Okay, Simon McCaffrey said, move over to REW, way better than Fuzz. It's gotten so good. I agree, it is really, really good. And the one thing I would say that Fuzz Measure still does for me that I don't think RumiQ Wizard does, maybe I'm just missing it. That's always a possibility that I just don't know how to do it with it. But the thing that I love about Fuzz Measure is when, you know, I'm making adjustments and I'm trying to get somewhere, you can do all of these captures and have this history of all these graphs and compare them in all these different ways. And I don't think RumiQ Wizard quite does that. It does, you know, all of the things sort of individually, but you can't keep this really cool catalog of all of these things, you know, that go back months. You know, I'll have, so some of these files have probably 50, 60, you know, captures in there that I'm still comparing to, you know. So that's the only reason I still keep it around. But yeah, Room EQ Wizard is incredible. I love it. Okay, so now we have Philip Paul Close. When analyzing a room, it makes sense to use an array of mics. The spatial difference between the positions is so different that only averages of several positions make sense and present oral impression. Yeah, I get what you're saying with this. In the process that I was in, you know, I don't have a way of capturing and averaging an array of microphones sort of in one go, like in one sweep. I don't have a bunch of microphones. I don't know that the software does that. Maybe it does. I don't know. And so, you know, I would potentially have to do multiple passes in multiple positions. And when I start looking at the number of graphs that I do throughout this process, it would be, I mean, it would take the rest of my life to do it. It took a long time, even without having to take 5 or 6 passes for every time I needed to check things. I just don't know that I could do it quick enough that way. So that was probably, you know, my first sort of hesitation about trying to tackle it that way, even though I understand the potential benefits of it. And then the other thing that I'm not sure how you would get around unless you had a very specialized system. And I talked about this in the last episode. So when we're looking at the first graphs, you see this like comb filtering, these cancellation in the high frequencies, because I didn't have the microphone perfectly placed in between the two speakers. If it is not exactly the same distance from those high frequency drivers, you'll get that comb filtering, and it can be the difference of an inch, you know. And so, and I'm finding it more beneficial to, at a certain point, always be testing with both of the speakers going and having the microphone in that perfectly, you know, equidistant spot between the speakers. And so if I was going to move the mic around the room, then I will get all this weird comb filtering between the speakers. And so I'm not really sure how you would overcome that. Unless this software is specifically designed to identify it and compensate for that. So I don't know. So there's a couple things there that you didn't, you know, just didn't make it easy for me to do that. I might do it at some point once I get to the end of the rainbow. You know, do a bunch of stuff kind of right around my listening position and do an average and see what it's looking like. Because it does change dramatically if you just move a foot in either direction or up and down. That's when it really changes a lot. So so I might do the experiment just to see what it's looking like, see if there's something I'm missing there. But point well taken. Okay, so there's Patrick Dzirla? I don't, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Okay, so okay, question is, was it an advantage or disadvantage to call your studio hunk of shit? Greetings from Germany. No, I'm not sure. You know, I think for me it didn't matter because at the end of the day, I was really the only studio client at a certain point. And, you know, I adopted the hunk of shit name kind of around the same time when, you know, when it was really becoming more about just me recording projects. And so it wasn't as much about me trying to sell a producer or a band on what a great studio this would be for them to come and record in. And so it didn't really matter, you know. I mean, I could call it whatever I want, and I wouldn't care. Definitely, most of the rock bands were totally delighted by it. There was one rap artist, the rap artist Paris, that I worked with in the sort of early and mid '90s. In that studio, he did not like the name Hunk of Shit. was not going to put that on his fucking records. He's like, this is stupid, and I'm not putting it on my record. So he called it House of Sound, HOS. And so I always had that as a backup, you know, if somebody was really offended by it. But, you know, I mean, I think that was really the point of it, is that I didn't care. I wasn't trying to sell studio time. And I think that was a little bit of the irreverence in me, that it's like, I can call this thing hunk of shit, and, you know, and it doesn't matter. You know, it matters how it sounds. It doesn't matter what the name is. So that was sort of the point of it. Okay, so we got Kevin Finkelmeyer, great last name, love that. Is asking if I'm adding Atmos. I've answered this question, but I kept it in there because there's sort of a small update there. I do not have Atmos in the room, so that's still the situation that I'm in. But people are definitely asking for it now. So I've been asked for it on the Nickel Creek record, and I've been asked for it on Grace's record. And so, you know, like, these immersive versions of albums are like part of the release of a record now. I mean, the last two records that I've recorded, both of them are saying, hey, we need Atmos immersive version of this record. I have no means of doing it here. And so on Grace's record, I was going to try and run a bunch of stems so I could capture the sound of the RCA console, and then go to another studio that was set up for Atmos and just use the stems and place things around and whatever, and try and preserve the sound of the record. Things got super crazy, didn't have time, and so it was just one of those moments where I just had to concede, like, I don't have time to do this. And so here you go, somebody, make it Atmos. And I just gave the multi-tracks to somebody else and said, have at it. And they sent me mixes, and this was one where I really had to just listen for the song, listen for the mix, because, you know, this was about as different of a mix setup as you can possibly get than what I used on the record. You know, I was mixing through, you know, a 70-year-old tube console onto an Ampex 350 series quarter-inch tape machine. You know, it was just a ridiculous fucking thing to do, and really has a sound to it, and you'll never get that sound going through a computer. And you know, these Atmos mixes are done entirely in the box, so it's just a very, very different thing. Very capable mixer, I think did a very great musical job, and I had to just listen for, are these songs being represented, you know, in the way that they should? Can I just hear the song and not be sitting there going like, but it doesn't sound like my RCA console? And he did a great job, and those will go out there in the world. It sounds very different than the stereo version of the record, but who knows, maybe there'll be some people that like those better. So there it is. That's what's going on in the world of Atmos for me. People are asking for it now, so I'm probably going to have to deal with it at some point if that just keeps coming, you know. Okay, so then, let's see, I am Yila is the username. It's pretty good. Okay, so this person is saying that they're shocked that I don't have latency-free monitoring system for musicians in the last questions. Okay. This person is a producer and a musician, been in the studio, software monitoring, comb filtering when playing acoustic instruments through headphones and spill. Yeah, I agree. It's not ideal. And, you know, I definitely spent a good amount of time being able to listen to stuff without latency in headphones, and it's definitely better, for sure. You know, trying to make that workflow happen is a little bit challenging. Certainly not impossible. You know, there's definitely ways to do it. And I think when I sort of weighed the whole thing out, I just sort of kind of looked at the reality that most people at this point are just used to it. Musicians, you know, honestly, latency-free monitoring is probably more unfamiliar for most people that are walking into a studio now. So I don't think it's a huge problem for people at this point, even though I think it probably is better to not have it there. So, you know, I try to keep it as short as I can and to make the best of it. So that's where the workflow is just so much easier. you know, not having to have this whole other path that never touches anything with latency. And the headphone mixers, you know, all of these Cat 5 headphone mixer systems are just really wonderfully convenient. So I'm gonna accept it for what it is and try and make it work. Okay. Golden ratio. Somebody just simply asked, what is the golden ratio? There was some sort of slightly smarmy responses here. Somebody said Google. And somebody actually provided the actual ratio, 1.618. But it probably is more meaningful to say the golden ratio, sort of in general terms, it's a ratio, a mathematical ratio that shows up and occurs a lot in nature. So there's like the chambers of the Nautilus. You'll see these like spirals where each successive chamber is this difference of ratio and size, and so it seems like there's something special about this ratio just in how things naturally form in our environment. So that's why people refer to it as the golden ratio. I think that's probably more what the person was asking for. Okay, so Ben Thomas is asking, what range of volumes you're tuning the room to? Presumably the low-end issues are exacerbated with increasing volume. So are you tuning to a level limit that you'd ordinarily mix at, but accepting? This is a really good question. I was very curious about this early on when I was really getting into using fuzz measure in two ways. And there's another question later. And so maybe I'll wait for the other part of it. But I've done this experiment of doing a read of the room super loud, super quiet, in the middle, like all kinds of different volumes, and it really doesn't change it. And there was a response here. Somebody responded saying acoustics are linear, and so it'll be the same at whatever volume you put it at. And I think that was definitely what I experienced when I had that same thought of like, I wonder if it's different when it's loud. And so, I mean, I think there is a point where, as you're sort of reaching the limits of the range of volume for your speakers, it'll certainly change. And the only other place in the other extreme, if it's really quiet, where it's so soft that the ambient noise floor in the room starts to, you know, interact with whatever sounds are coming out of the speaker, then you could get some sort of erroneous readings that way. So, but I generally try and do it at just kind of like a medium volume, you know. I probably do the sweeps a little louder than what I monitor at throughout the day. I don't monitor loud at this point. Occasionally I'll turn it up just to kind of like feel some low end in the room, but you know, I don't blast these speakers all day. And I do the sweep a little louder for the reason that I just mentioned. I just want to kind of like get it a little further away from the noise floor, because you can, you know, have like these subsonic sort of rumbles just from like trucks driving by that are even hundreds of yards away and stuff. And so you'll get these sort of random readings way down at 20 hertz and below. And so just raising the level sort of pushes that stuff further away from what you're really measuring in the room. So yeah, just kind of a moderate volume, a little louder than what I normally listen at. Seems to work for me. Okay, so then Eric Chesick is asking, okay, so this is about, it's a comment about having plywood on the walls, which is what I was talking about in this episode. And so I think this is, the question is, was this before or after you were told by Mr. Fire Marshal that you can't have plywood on the walls? I'm wondering if plywood is allowed on the ceiling for some reason. Yeah, it hasn't come up yet, and the fire marshal has been through here. I was actually, he signed off on the permit for the fire alarm system. I had to put in a fucking just horribly expensive fire alarm system in this building, because it's, you know, sort of being considered a commercial building for certain things, and the codes and permitting for that is just such a pain in the ass. Oh, it's the most unsatisfying purchase of my life. Give me some smoke detectors, I'll be fine. But I've got to put in this fucking crazy thing. All right. Anyways, I'll stop whining about that. Okay, so now we're into episode 24. Okay, so how long of a walk is it from the house to the studio? Kind of looks like a nice commute. Yeah. It's about 1,200 feet, so whatever that is. Yeah, maybe roughly a quarter of a mile walking from the house. And it's a beautiful stroll. I love it every day. It just, makes me so happy. And even, in the moments where I go back to the house, maybe have lunch or get some food, it's just beautiful to get outside and have that little walk. Sometimes I do it on my bike, as you've heard, with my dog, which was problematic. But yeah, it's a beautiful little stroll between the house and the barn. Okay, so then Kelvin Funkner is asking, just curious, are you planning on covering the tube traps with some acoustically transparent fabric, or was there another way you are going to hide them? I kept this in because I realized in the tube trap episode I showed how to put the tubes together and put some caps on it, but I did not talk about the fabric. And if you look behind me right here, so these ones, the brown ones, those have fabric over them. And so on those, what I did, those were done back in Los Angeles at Barefoot. And so I just got some stretchy material. It was probably some sort of, I'm not sure, like a, what do they call that? A particular type of sheet material. It'll come to me in a second. But like a stretchy cotton material, and you just sew it into a sock that is just a slightly smaller diameter than the tube itself. So it's maybe like 1 inch smaller in diameter, so you can just stretch it over there just like a sock, and it holds itself on. And the excess can just sort of spill over into the interior of the tube trap, and then I covered the caps with the same material, and so I wrapped it and just stapled it on the other side and just glue the cap on there, and then you have a tube that doesn't have exposed fiberglass, which is important. You got to cover that stuff up, because as it's being sort of mechanically activated by all the sound pressure in the room, the vibrations in the room, it can cause little particles of fiberglass to float around in the room. You don't want that, obviously. I have it going on now, whatever. I should cover it up, but I haven't yet. Just, it's on the list. It's on the to-do list. But that's how I do it. And the material is not really that crucial. You can get an acoustic material if you want that's specifically designed to be acoustically transparent, but if you put a thin layer of any kind of material on there, it'll be transparent in this application. So what is it? Trying to remember the name of just the stretchy style sheet material. I can't remember. All right, moving on. But stretchy fabric, some sort of stretchy fabric, we'll do it. Okay, so now this people listen to a Northward acoustic FTB room and how you'd compare that setup to yours. I've never heard one of those rooms. When I saw this, I went and checked out their website. They look like they're definitely know what they're doing. They're deep in it with their room design thing. It seems like they've landed on an approach that seems to be giving good results consistently. So, yeah, resonant panels wrapped in fiberglass. Yeah, so a similar thing, this VPR style thing, but wrapped in fiberglass. I think Northward used panel traps, isolation, yeah. Yeah, it looks like they do great stuff. I've never heard one, so I don't know how it would compare to where I'm at. I do, after doing this last episode, it's really interesting. It's one of the things I love about doing this YouTube channel. Whenever I dig through all of this information and sort of organize it in my brain in a way, preparing, when I'm preparing to share it with other people. So I have to sort of reload it into my brain and try and reorganize it so I can, try and talk about it in a way that makes sense. It always ends up revealing some things, and it revealed some stuff that I think I missed before. And so I'm gonna give Helmholtz another try in the back of the room. I think I know what I was missing there, why they weren't working. So we'll see what I come up with there. I'll definitely share it if it's meaningful. Okay, so this is Eric Chesick. You've mentioned making a Faraday cage before to shield against hum leaking into single coil pickups. Can you talk more about how you did that? I wonder if the tuned absorbers help a little bit since there's a sheet of metal inside. Unfortunately, these absorbers don't really help for that in a Faraday way, even though they are made out of steel, which is a ferrous metal. A Faraday cage has to be continuous. So like you have to make a box all 6 sides. So floor, ceiling, and 4 walls all have to be, you know, touching each other. And it can be porous, and so I made it out of these 4x8 sheets of what's called pulled steel. It has these like little diamond-shaped openings in it. And so that stuff works because the low frequency waveform of like a 60 hertz hum, which is what the pickup is inducing on a guitar, is so big that even with the tiny little openings, it will get filtered out, you know, by this pulled steel that has these openings that are roughly maybe about a ½ an inch in one direction and maybe an inch in the other direction, the openings. And then the material is probably a quarter of an inch thick, something like that. And it really did work. This was all with the guidance of Larry Jasper, Undertone Audio circuit designer guy. And I believe all of them need to be in contact with each other, so there is electrical continuity between all of them. And so yeah, it totally works. You know, so the obvious problem with these things in here is that there are big gaps in between them. As soon as you have a gap, then it doesn't work. So you know, it's all got to have no more than like a ½ an inch, you know, or an inch little sort of openings, and then it'll actually block that low frequency stuff. What it won't block is any RF interference, right? It's specifically designed to block low frequency hum, but to block, you know, RF, which is a much higher frequency, you know, like if your guitar is picking up a radio station or something like that, you would need something very different, you know, like a copper shield all the way around you, you know, that's grounded, something like that. But yeah, that's how I did it, and it totally worked. Okay, now username Jussie Denies. Okay, could you include a visual of the waterfall plot of the before and after measurements of the metal plate absorbers? I don't. Unfortunately, there is a crash that happened with the application, you know, with the fuzz measure application, and I lost the shoot, you know, the graph of the room that I did before there was anything in the room. And I will tell you the other problem that I was having was that we're now revealing some of the limitations of fuzz measure, that the room decay was so long that it was longer than what that software could show, or at least I couldn't figure out how to get it to show it. It was longer than a second in this room in the low frequencies. And so I couldn't really see what the total length was. But yeah, I'll see if, when we get back into this and I can pull that stuff up again, we can look at some waterfall comparisons. It might be interesting to see the difference. You know, I have the one thing where I have just foam, and then I add the sheet of metal, and you can see the difference, you know, between what the resonant panel is really doing. That might be interesting to see. Okay, so then we have David Roberts is asking, okay, these are questions about the production of the Astro Lounge. Was the space theme and aesthetic already chosen by the time you got to recording, or did that come up during the recording production process? The space theme was definitely, that had already been established by Greg Camp. You know, he was the primary songwriter in the band and really was the person that sort of brought the overall kind of direction and aesthetic, you know, to each of the records. He's really brilliantly creative person. And so, yeah, so, you know, he was definitely on a space, you know, sort of, yeah, he was very infatuated with space stuff at the time. And there's a bunch of, you know, songs that sort of reflect that. There's the song "Who's There" that has all the sort of space sounds in it. That's you know, a question about is there alien life out there? So then a lot of interesting sound effects. It's, you know, lasers and stuff on Stoned, Radio Dialogue, Bridge of All-Star, Theremin, Who's There, as the stuff where those generated in the studio are sampled. So the Radio Dialogue in All-Star was, that was sampled. So there was this really cool record that was like this sort of, you know, radio style reenactment of the Apollo 11 moon landing. And so it was like all the conversation between, you know, the Houston Command Center and the astronauts and stuff. And so so that's where that dialogue came from, was from that record. And I'm sure we cleared it or whatever. We had to do all that stuff. And then everything, most of the other stuff was generated in the studio. And so Greg Camp's brother was a real genius with synthesizers. So we had him come in and bring in a bunch of cool old analog synthesizers. And so all that like theremin sounding stuff and weird, you know, spacey sound effect stuff was Greg's brother on an analog synthesizer and me with a, you know, analog tape delay. Just freaking out and having fun, doing a bunch of crazy space sounds. So then there's another question here. The variety of organ sounds on the record, especially on Roadman, did you have an array of organs, or was it one with settings, overtones, tweak? I had two organs in that era that I used on everything. So one was a Hammond M2. So it was a cool organ that had a built-in speaker. Mine did, but there was no Leslie in it. And so then I had bought a separate Leslie as an external speaker. And so I set it up so the Hammond M2 could plug into a Leslie speaker, so I could get a Leslie sound. So sometimes I use the internal speaker for stuff, which is its own specific sound. Very sort of like, you know, funeral parlor organ sound. And then when you go through the Leslie, then it was more sort of like the classic, you know, B3 sort of rock organ sound. And then I had this other kind of weird Hammond console organ that had a Leslie speaker built into the body of the organ. I'm sorry, I don't remember the model of it, but it had a bunch of really cool features on it. This like reiterate thing where it would go make this cool sort of, you know, sort of like tremolo picked sound, and just had a whole other sort of array of cool sounds that it did. And so all the organ sounds that you hear were, you know, those two Hammond organs, that were, neither of which were the sort of, you know, whatever, commonly sort of, you know, first choice Hammond B3 type thing. So, you know, I had these kind of funky little cheap Hammond organs, but they sounded cool when you mic'd them up. Okay, so now we got Brian Dunn. Don't know if this is the right place, but on your next Q&A, could you talk about panning? I know that's basic, but my question is on hard panning opposed to 3 or 4 notches back towards the center. Sometimes I wonder whether it's better to hard pan or it's better to move it slightly back to center to fill the side up more. How much actual hard panning is done in most mixes? Okay, yeah. So I've talked about this a little bit at times, but it's very straightforward. I'll talk about it again. I definitely do hard panning in my mixes. I love having stuff sound super wide. Sometimes I will make efforts to put an ambience on the other side to just kind of like balance it out and have it connect to the other side so it's not so just starkly over there, so you can have like the dry signal of the instrument all the way over there and just put like a subtle little either slap delay on the other side or a short little room sound or something on the other side that just kind of like connects it to the rest of the world. And then the other thing that I do, if I'm not hard panning, there are times where I will withhold the hard panning, like in the verses of a song, when I'm trying to get the like big chorus moment. So I'll have the guitars panned in a little bit. So like in Pro Tools, instead of being 100, they would be like 75 or 70 or something like that. So you can still very readily identify, oh, this guitar's over here, and there's another thing, maybe there's a keyboard over there or something. And then when you get to the chorus, all of a sudden everything goes boom and just widens out, and it just enhances that dramatic transition of all of a sudden everything just expands in every direction. Like it gets louder, there's more instruments, you maybe add percussion, there's more high end, there's more low end, it's wider, so like it just expands in every way, and it just makes it a more eventful transition in the song. So it's a cool trick. That's probably one of the few times when I do sort of bring stuff in. You know, I also definitely, you know, just to try and maintain separation between stuff, if everything is hard panned all the time, then it gets hard for your ears to pull them apart. And so if I have guitars hard panned, then, and there's like a stereo organ, then I'll bring the organ in a little bit. So it's not occupying the same width as the guitars are. Or I'll do the background vocals that are panned out. If I have stereo like gang vocals, you know, pan those out so they're only like out 50 and the guitars are out 100. So they're stereo, but they're just occupying a different width. And then it's easier for your ears and your brain to separate them when you're listening. So there are some useful applications for when to hard pan, when to, you know, bring it in a little bit. At some point I'm going to do an episode all about panning. I don't think it'll be that long. It's pretty straightforward, but there's some useful stuff there, I think. Okay. Conrad Fosters. Okay, here's the question. What is the thickness of the metal sheet in between? Okay, so in the original Renz solution ones, the ones that were made in Germany, they're all 1 millimeter thick. The ones that I did, I ended up going a tiny bit thinner than that because my sheets were a little bit smaller in dimension than what was the design that was sent to me. So if you go a tiny bit thinner, it will push the resonances a little bit lower, and I was hoping it would all sort of, you know, work out that way. So I started with 18 gauge steel, and I apologize, I don't remember what the exact, you can look it up. And be careful because gauges are specific to the type of metal. That drove me crazy. So I started with the 18 gauge. That was too big because of this issue where it was different for different types of metal. And then I did 20, and I compared 20 gauge steel and 22 gauge steel. And I think what I ended up doing was, for the larger panels, those are 20 gauge, and for the smaller panels, they are 22 gauge. So those are the thicknesses that I used in my room. Okay, so then Thomas Cody Prang is asking, do you have recommended specs for the, maximum diameter insulation? So I talked about all this. Okay, have you had experience with rock wool pipe insulation? I've never tried that. I don't know if it would be stiff enough. If it's the same as the stuff that goes in the walls, as the bats that go in the wall. And so, and all the new ones that I did, they vary in thickness, anywhere from being, covering like an inside diameter of 8 inches up to an inside diameter of 16 inches. The walls on all of them were 2 inches thick. So that's what I used for this last round. Okay, then we got Michael Nielsen. Okay, I love your episode. 2 questions. Have you tried the Kirchhoff EQ versus Fab filter? I haven't really yet. I saw this comment. I looked it up. It looks cool. It looks very similar to Fab filter, but they're incorporating some cool like models and coloration for the bands, which could be really useful. So I'm definitely going to try it and see if there's anything about it that beats Fab filter. I mean, Fab filter has been on everything I've been doing lately. It's just, it works so good and it's so easy. The user interface is so good on it. But Kirchhoff EQ looks very similar and could offer some cool new stuff. So I'm definitely going to check it out. Okay, and then I love this question. Where's a good Carl Sagan place to start? So I would say the best first thing to check out is he has, I guess at the end of the day, it's a poem. It's like a little essay that he wrote called Pale Blue Dot. It's short, and it encompasses so much of what was so incredible about him. So the context is that he wrote Pale Blue Dot. So he was involved with the Voyager space probe program, Voyager 1, Voyager 2. He was actually in charge of curating what music and sounds and stuff would be on these records. There's actual LPs on there that are gold-plated on the Voyager spacecraft. So if there's an alien out there that comes across these things, they can play this record. There's these cool, like, cryptographic or graphic instructions of how to, play the record. And so he curated the music on there. There's some really interesting stuff about that. But so as the one of the Voyager spacecrafts, I forget which one, was starting to get further out in our solar system, and I think this is when maybe it was passing Jupiter. I apologize, I don't remember the specific details. It could have been further than that, because now it's actually beyond our solar system. It's the only thing man-made that is now in interstellar space, is these Voyager spacecraft. And so Carl Sagan had the thought, as this thing was way, way out there, either just past Jupiter or something like that, very far away, to turn the camera around and take a picture of planet Earth as it looks from the planet Jupiter or wherever they were at the time. And when you look back, it's just this, it looks like what Jupiter and Mars looks like to us from this planet. It's just a tiny little dot in the sky. And he wrote this essay called Pale Blue Dot that sort of conveys the feelings that it evoked for him when he looked at that photograph. And it's incredible. It's an incredible writing. And it's incredible what he says in there and how relevant it still is today, maybe even more relevant now than in the time that he wrote it. It's one of the things that's truly extraordinary about him, is he was just way, way, way ahead of his time. And I think that will continue to be the case for a while. There are still, I think, ideas that are important to him that everybody else is still catching up with. And so if you just go on YouTube, type in Carl Sagan Pale Blue Dot, it'll come right up. And there's a beautiful thing of him reading it himself and a bunch of images that are paired with it. And man, every time I watch that thing and listen to it, I can't get to the end of it without without tearing up. It's so powerful. It's so incredible. And then there's another thing. There's obviously, he's written a bunch of really amazing books. There's the entire original Cosmos series that he did. And even though some of the science is outdated now, again, there's stuff in there that he talks about that is still ahead of its time. I think more of his, social commentary was way ahead of its time. And but the Cosmos series is amazing. That was the beginning of, it was like the first moment where, like, astrophysics and the concept of really, how inconceivably vast the universe is was brought into the homes of everyday Americans. People just really hadn't been exposed to it before. And so it was one of the first, he was the first people to really connect between sort of higher academics and common folks, these concepts about astrophysics and stuff. It was a really cool thing that he did to sort of bring that into everyday life for people. So that series is amazing. And then there's one other clip that is just can't be missed. That's super fun to check out. It's him on the Johnny Carson show talking about some scientific inaccuracies in the movie Star Wars, which is, you know, kind of silly because that, you know, that movie is, you know, a fantasy movie. It's not really meant to be, you know, scientifically accurate, but still, you know, he was there to comment on it. But he transitions into some other comments about that movie that, again, way, way ahead of his time. Incredible what he says in that thing about the Wookiee and stuff. Like, you'll you'll see if you look it up. It's pretty incredible, especially with what we just went through, what we're still going through. You know, this recent huge awakening with equality and inclusivity of everybody on this planet. Like, he was way ahead on all of that. Just an incredible human being. So, yeah. There's a reason we named our son after him. He was unbelievably brilliant and just a good dude. His voice is really, really missed. He's just a wonderful guy. So there you go. So I think this is probably a good place to stop. I still got a ways to go, but we'll get back into it. So again, the reminder, we will be live on Friday. Grace Potter and myself talking about this new record. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions in real time through the comments, and then it'll transition into a pre-recorded production deconstruction of one of the songs off the record. I'm not sure which one yet, but that's going to happen this Friday. So excited to see you all there, see some comments, have some back and forth there. It should be super fun, and I will see you then. All right. Bye.